To family.
Cheers to family!
Wonderful.
Hello.
The dining room glowed gold under the chandelier light, and every glass on the table was crystal, because Margaret Whitfield did not believe in anything less for her 40th wedding anniversary. Laughter drifted between courses. A pianist played somewhere near the windows. Then the doors opened. A woman none of them had ever met stepped inside wearing a soft blue dress, holding a small wrapped gift, smiling like she belonged there. Every fork stopped moving. A wine glass slipped from someone's hand and cracked against the floor. At the head of the table sat Margaret's daughter-in-law, Claire. She didn't gasp. She didn't stand. She simply looked at her husband. Because while the entire room stared at the stranger in the doorway, Claire was watching the only person whose face would tell her the truth. His face had gone white, not because a secret had finally been exposed, but because he realized in that exact moment that his wife had known this was coming long before he did. Some secrets arrive through whispered calls at midnight. Some hide behind business trips that last a little too long. And some walk through the front door in a blue dress, holding a gift, pretending they were invited. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Claire Whitfield was 49, and most people in Savannah assumed she'd been born into money. She hadn't. She'd built her interior design firm from a single rented office above a hardware store, sketching floor plans by hand until 2 a.m. while her daughter did homework at the kitchen table. Her father, a contractor who never once handed her a client for free, used to say, "If you build it yourself, no one can ever tell you it wasn't real." She never forgot that. By the time she met Daniel Whitfield, she had already built something real. Daniel was warm, easy to talk to, the kind of man who made every room feel lighter the second he walked into it. For a long time, that was true. Then, slowly, it wasn't. The trips for client meetings started multiplying. Dinners ran later. Phone calls ended the second Claire entered the room. She noticed everything. She said nothing, not because she was afraid of the truth, but because she'd learned a long time ago that truth doesn't need help finding its way out. It just needs time. One evening, Daniel came home with takeout from a restaurant nearly an hour away. "Thought we'd eat in tonight," he said, smiling easily. "That sounds nice," Claire said. As he unpacked the bag, a receipt slipped halfway out. 2 entrees, 2 desserts, 2 glasses of wine. She looked away before he noticed, and smiled when he sat down across from her. She had learned, over the years, that people who are lying often perform confidence far better than people telling the truth. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, Claire sat alone in the study with the receipt folded in her palm. She didn't cry. She thought instead about her father, about the folder he'd left with his attorney years before he passed, the one he'd told her not to open until she needed it. She wondered, for the first time, if that day had finally come. Daniel's mother, Margaret, believed she was the emotional center of the family, and she rarely let anyone forget it. She arrived unannounced most Sundays, always with something baked, always with an opinion. "You work too much," she told Claire one afternoon, setting down a tray of scones. "It's been a busy season," Claire said. "A marriage needs tending." "It does." Margaret waited for an argument. None came. She tried again. "Daniel deserves someone who makes him feel like a priority." Claire poured the tea calmly. "I imagine every husband hopes for that." Margaret frowned. She hated that she couldn't get a reaction. People who can't be provoked are, in her experience, either very foolish or very dangerous. She had already decided which one Claire was. What Margaret didn't know was that Claire's father, before he passed, had restructured the family's assets years earlier, placing the design firm, the lake house, and a majority share of the family's rental properties solely in Claire's name. Not because he distrusted Daniel, because he'd seen this story before in other families, and he believed in insurance more than he believed in promises. That week, Claire's attorney, an old family friend named Robert, called. "Someone's been asking questions," he said. "About ownership. About the trust." Claire didn't seem surprised. "I expected that eventually. Should I respond? Give them everything they're legally entitled to see?" Robert paused. "You think they're planning something?" "I don't think," Claire said quietly. "I know." Later that week, Margaret visited Robert's office herself, unannounced, asking polite questions about family estate planning, phrased carefully enough to sound harmless. Robert answered every question the way he answered every question from anyone who wasn't his actual client. Politely, vaguely, and without giving away a single thing that mattered. Margaret left convinced she'd learned something useful. She hadn't learned anything at all. That evening, Margaret sat in her own kitchen replaying the conversation, certain she'd caught the edge of something important. She'd always believed she understood her son better than anyone. Better, certainly, than the woman he'd married. To Margaret, Claire's composure had never looked like strength. It looked like distance, like a woman who had learned to survive a marriage rather than live inside one. She told herself, more than once that night, that she was doing this for Daniel's sake. She never once considered that Daniel might be the one who needed to change. Across town, Claire sat with her daughter over a late dinner, the two of them going over college applications spread across the table. "You seem distracted tonight," her daughter said. "Just work," Claire said, smiling. Her daughter studied her for a moment, the way children sometimes do when they sense more than they're told. "You always say that." "Because it's usually true." Her daughter let it go, the way she always did, trusting that her mother would say more when she was ready. Claire almost told her everything that night. Almost. But some truths, she'd learned, needed a stage of their own. Not a kitchen table on an ordinary Tuesday. Margaret spent that week planning the 40th anniversary celebration herself, down to the napkin folds. Officially, it honored 40 years of marriage. Unofficially, Margaret had her own agenda. She believed Daniel had wasted years on a woman who cared more about her career than her family, and she'd convinced herself she was owed the chance to fix it. So when she addressed the invitations, one envelope had no family name on it. Instead, she wrote, "Sarah Bennett, Daniel's co-worker, the woman he'd been seeing for months." Margaret told herself she wasn't being cruel. She told herself she was simply introducing the family to someone important. She never once asked whether that belief was actually true. She just repeated it to herself until it felt like one. Sarah received the invitation and read it 3 times before calling Daniel. "Your mother invited me to your anniversary party." Daniel's stomach dropped. "I didn't know she'd do that. She said she wants me to meet everyone." He looked out his office window at the street below, at people living simple, ordinary lives, the kind he no longer had. "Do you think it's too soon?" Sarah asked. Every instinct told him to say yes, to end it before it became impossible to undo. Instead, he heard himself say, "No, it'll be fine." The lie came easier than the truth ever had. Meanwhile, Claire spent that same week the way she spent every week: client meetings, site visits, dinner on the table by 7. She never mentioned the receipt. Never mentioned the calls that ended too quickly. Not because she'd forgotten, because she was waiting for one piece of information Robert had promised her by Friday: the name of the person who had actually requested the ownership records. When the name came through, she read it twice. It wasn't Daniel's name on the request. It was Margaret's. Claire set the paper down slowly and, for the first time in weeks, allowed herself a small, quiet smile. Because now she understood exactly what kind of evening the anniversary party was about to become. By 6 o'clock, the Whitfield estate glowed with string lights and candlelight. A quartet played near the staircase. Family filled the dining room in their best clothes, toasting 40 years of marriage. Margaret moved through the room, greeting every guest personally, certain tonight would mark a new beginning for her son. She'd rehearsed this evening in her head for weeks. The toast, the introduction, the moment her son's family finally saw things her way. She believed, with the kind of certainty only the truly convinced ever manage, that by midnight, everyone would thank her for it. Daniel arrived tense, scanning the room until he found Claire near the fireplace, laughing gently with two older relatives. She wore deep green silk and her mother's pearl earrings, and she looked, infuriatingly, completely at peace. He couldn't understand it. If she suspected anything, why wasn't she afraid? Her calm unsettled him more than any argument could have. Then Margaret tapped a spoon against her glass. "Family means embracing the future," she said, smiling warmly. "And sometimes, welcoming new beginnings." Daniel closed his eyes. "Please don't." The front door opened. Sarah stepped inside in her blue dress, holding a small gift, smiling, until she noticed the silence. The quartet stopped playing. A glass shattered on the floor. Sarah looked toward Daniel. His face had gone pale. Then she looked at Claire. Claire wasn't crying, wasn't standing, wasn't even looking at Sarah. She was watching Daniel, studying him, as if she'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Margaret swept toward Sarah and embraced her like an old friend. "There you are. Everyone. I'd like you to meet someone very special." Silence pressed against the walls of the room. Finally, Claire spoke, calm, almost gentle. "Sarah, may I ask you something?" Sarah nodded, uncertain. "How long have you known my husband?" "About 8 months," Sarah said honestly. "And in those 8 months," Claire continued, "what did Daniel tell you about our marriage?" Sarah glanced at Daniel. "He said nothing. He told me," she said softly, "that it was already over." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Claire only nodded. "I believe you." Those 3 words caught everyone off guard, even Daniel. Margaret snapped, "Claire, enough." "Enough of what?" Claire asked. "This interrogation." "It's not an interrogation," Claire said. "It's a conversation. And I have one more question." She turned back to Sarah. "Did he ever tell you why the marriage ended?" Sarah hesitated. "He said, you cared more about your career than your family, that you'd already agreed to separate." Claire simply nodded again, unshaken. "I understand." Sarah frowned. "You're not angry?" "No," Claire said. "I'm disappointed. There's a difference." She stood for the first time all evening, smoothing her dress, and looked around the room at 40 faces waiting for her to fall apart. "Since we're sharing things tonight," she said, "I have something too." Claire reached into her clutch and set a single folded document on the table beside the anniversary cake. "Robert," she said, "would you mind explaining this to everyone?" Robert Ellison rose from his seat near the back of the room. No one had noticed the family attorney had been invited at all. "Of course," he said. 3 years ago, Claire's father restructured the family holdings. The design firm, the lake house on Hilton Head, 60% of the Whitfield rental portfolio. He paused. "All of it is solely in Claire's name. It was never part of the marital estate, and it never will be, regardless of what happens between her and Daniel." Margaret's smile disappeared. "That's not possible," she said. "Daniel has run the rental business for a decade." "Daniel manages it," Robert said gently. "He's never owned it." Daniel stared at Claire. "You knew about this?" "I've known for years," Claire said. "My father didn't trust promises. He trusted paperwork." Margaret's voice sharpened. "You've been planning this. All this time you knew, and you said nothing." "I said nothing," Claire agreed, "because I was hoping I'd never need to say anything at all. I hoped I was wrong about you, Daniel. I hoped I was wrong about the calls, and the trips, and the receipts." She looked at him steadily. "I wasn't." Daniel's jaw tightened. "So this whole night you let it happen. You let Sarah walk in here and humiliate herself." "No," Claire said. "Your mother did that. I simply chose not to stop it." Sarah, who had been silent for almost a full minute, finally spoke. "You knew I was going to be invited?" "I suspected," Claire said. "Robert confirmed it a week ago. The request for the ownership records didn't come from Daniel's attorney." She looked at Margaret. "It came from yours." Every eye in the room turned toward Margaret. "I was protecting my son," Margaret said, but her voice had lost its certainty. "You were protecting an idea," Claire said. The idea that I was the problem. It was easier than asking whether Daniel was. For the first time all evening, Margaret had nothing to say. Sarah left the party 20 minutes later, quietly, without her coat, refusing Daniel's attempt to walk her out. She would tell a friend weeks afterward that the worst part wasn't finding out about the marriage. It was realizing she had never actually been the one Daniel was hiding something from. Claire had known the whole story before Sarah had learned any of it. Daniel moved out of the house 11 days later, into a rented apartment above a bakery. The kind of apartment he used to laugh about when they were younger and broke and certain nothing like this would ever happen to them. The divorce took 4 months, not because it was complicated. Robert had made sure of that years earlier, but because Daniel spent most of it hoping Claire would change her mind. She never did. Margaret called twice in the following year. Claire answered both times, politely, and neither call lasted more than 3 minutes. Some relationships don't end in a single dramatic scene. They end quietly, in small, unremarkable phone calls, long after the dramatic scene everyone remembers. Richard, Daniel's cousin, was the only one from that side of the family who still checked in on Claire from time to time, usually over coffee, usually careful not to bring up his aunt or his cousin unless she did first. "You could have humiliated all of us that night," he told her once. "You didn't." "I didn't need to," Claire said. "The truth did that on its own. I just stopped standing in front of it." Richard thought about that for a long moment. "Margaret still says you planned the whole thing." "I know. Did you?" Claire smiled, the same quiet smile she'd worn at the party. "I planned to stop protecting people who weren't protecting me. Everything after that they did to themselves." Richard never repeated that conversation to his aunt. Some things, he decided, were better left for Margaret to figure out on her own, if she ever did. Claire kept the lake house. She kept the design firm, which grew in the 2 years that followed into the largest residential firm in 3 counties. She kept her calm, too. The same calm that had unsettled Margaret at that dinner table and unsettled Daniel every day after. People in Savannah still talk about the anniversary party sometimes, though the story has changed shape a little with each retelling, the way stories do. Some say Claire planned the whole evening from the beginning. She didn't, not exactly. She simply understood something her father had taught her long before she ever met Daniel Whitfield. You don't have to force the truth into the light. You only have to stop protecting the people who are hiding from it. Sometimes people ask her, even now, if she regrets not confronting Daniel sooner, if she wishes she'd said something the night of that first receipt instead of waiting. Claire doesn't think so. Some truths need time to reveal themselves fully. Rushing them only gives the people hiding something more time to hide better. She still lives in the same waterfront home, still drives the same modest car despite the money, still keeps her father's words close whenever she needs them. If you build it yourself, no one can ever tell you it wasn't real. She built her life twice, once with Daniel and once quietly and deliberately without him. Only one of those versions was ever really hers. Subscribe now and get ready for part 2, because the darkest secrets are still buried. The biggest betrayal hasn't been revealed yet. The hardest choices are still to come. And when the full truth finally surfaces, nothing and no one will ever be the same.